Hello, Resilient Souls. Welcome to Neuro Wellness Community's Resilience Resourcing Podcast, where connections empower resilience. This is a connection space where inspiring women and men share their real on their way to resilience. Each episode, I have the pleasure of spotlighting women and men in fields from performance neurotraining to film and all in between. You will get to know the unique tools these individuals each carry and how connecting with these empowering stories bring about camaraderie and in turn empower you toward your unique dreams and goals. I get the amazing opportunity to have Deb Harrison on this podcast, and Deb is she's been recognized on the Lincoln King Visionary Awards as the 2024 honoree for growth and change leader and kindness advocate, and it's pretty incredible. I just think that, like, what more of an amazing award than to be awarded as a kindness advocate. Like, that is what you are. That's what you're all about, and that's why we connected, because you are all about helping people have an impact and work on change and making it less stressful. And I love everything that you're all about, and I'm so excited for you to kind of share your story and just take people through what got you to become a kindness advocate, and kind of there's so much to your story, so I just kind of want to let you take the floor and kind of start it where you want to, from what your experience has been that has brought you to this point.
Ooh, what a great question. So, I don't get a lot of questions about the kindness advocate and what led me to that. So I think that that's really interesting. I get a lot of questions about what made you become a growth and change consultant and coach. But I'm going to answer the kindness question and it's going to answer the growth and change because they intertwine. And so when I was a little kid, I had a traumatic childhood, awesome childhood, great and beautiful and amazing things, but I also had some pretty traumatic experiences. And as a result of that, because there was so many things that I couldn't control, change became this overwhelming thing, to the degree that, like, and I tell this story, like, the blanket on my bed would be changed and I would feel really stressed out about that. And I think it has to do with that control component. There's all these things that you can't control. So you want to take control of these other things and maneuver through change. And so had this really the struggle with it. When something that really remarkable would happen, like Christmas every year, was generally a pretty decent day in the household. I would get very emotional at the end of Christmas because next Christmas isn't going to be the same. We're going to be different ages, etc. So really struggled with it, and that had to find ways to maneuver through it, because the reality is life's not going to stop. Those changes are going to keep happening. So it's not like, you can say, well, I don't like this, so I'm going to avoid it. It continues to happen. And the truth is, there's a lot of change that you do like. There are things that we like. So naturally developed this ability, right? Your resilience podcast, right? So we could call it resilience. You could call it grit, right? This ability to kind of maneuver through difficult circumstances. And we all require that at various times in our life. So I was building this skill set that I don't even necessarily think I was aware of, because, when you're 10 years old and you're trying to get through difficult circumstances, you're not thinking like, oh, this is great training for being a consultant. It just was happening. It was natural.
Yeah.
And at the same time, which probably was to some degree associated with the challenges that I was going through in the house, also had this passion for, like, making people smile and finding ways to help other people excel. So, when I was one of the younger kids on the Little League team, right, I felt really excited about helping even some of the older kids who maybe were getting nervous before it was their turn at bat, right? Like, I just had this natural inclination to want to, like, help people be their best and feel good about themselves. And I think that was probably because there was a lot of that needed inside my own head in ways that I had to power myself forward. So you could see there's that kindness. So I'm learning, okay, got to navigate through change. You've got to figure things out. And at the same time, like, you can be nice about it. And if you fast forward, because I'll go back and kind of talk through the journey, but if you fast forward, like, that's at the backbone of a lot of what I say when I'm working with organizations, is there's going to be some tough things we have to do, tough decisions that have to be made, hard tasks that have to be carried out. We're going to have to plan, we're going to have to budget, resource allocation. Those are difficult things. We're going to figure out the way through them. And guess what? We can be nice while doing it. So it's like that still carries over.
Wow.
But the neat thing is that throughout, right? So I kind of, maneuvered through childhood, became a teacher, which was one of my passions. I became an educator and loved it. And
Mhm.
um, could probably have a whole other conversation about how I transitioned out of that. But due to some different life circumstances, ended up moving from teaching into business consulting. And the kindness was always something that was important to me, but it was very much a PS, right? Like I
Yeah.
was doing all these other things, but like, oh, and I was also one of the nicest people. People tell, oh, you're one of the nicest people I ever met, or oh, you're so kind, right? So like it was a characteristic, but it was definitely not part of something that I promoted as my business model. Though certainly as a consultant and coach, it benefits us. If people feel good, they're going to be more apt to listen to you.
Of
But
course.
there's like I think less now, but still there's like a misperception that can happen that like if you're, people will even say like, oh, you're too nice for business. Like, oh, you're too
Mhm.
nice, right?
Yeah.
So I think you get reluctant to kind of call that a qualifier and you more just it's
Yeah.
like a personality trait. And repeatedly, though, job after job after job of client that I would work with, whether it was a company or it was an individual, people would make comments about, well, you made me feel comfortable. I felt really
Mhm.
seen. I felt really heard. I could tell that you
Mhm.
really cared about how I was going to be successful. So, like,
Mhm.
it was feeding in. And it wasn't until this past year that I started really like I would talk about it a lot. Like that people would say, well, it's one of the things that you really like about your business model. And I would say, like, I like that I'm always, helping people to recognize the importance of being kind and being nice to one another and being
Yeah.
optimistic and being hopeful. Because it sounds so simplistic, but we do forget
Yeah.
that in the heat of the moment.
Especially with
And
what like the world is going through right now. Like I feel like that is something that might seem so like you said simple, but it's
right,
so like impactful. Like that's why these people are remembering you is because not just because of your skill in teaching and impacting and helping them with change and all of that, but because you're coming at it with a kindness that is really genuine too. It's not fake. Like there's
right.
some, some people can be, kind just to like kind of salesy, like I'm just going to do this so that I can get something. Like I knew from the second I met you that this was very authentic. Like it's a very
Thank you.
real part of who you are.
That means a lot. I can like, and I think and that was the interesting thing is that like the more I leaned into it and the more I was like talking about it in conversations and people were saying it, I realized like, every time I talk about what I do and why I do it, I'm talking about kindness. So like I'm just
Mhm.
going to put that at the forefront. So it started becoming part of my business model. People would ask what I do and I'd say I'm growth and change consultant and coach and kindness advocate. And it became so empowering to say it that it now it's who I am, right? So it's really cool to have seen it that it was like at the tail end, even though it was important to me, to now me being like, I'm proud. I'm not going to necessarily hide that. And there have definitely been situations where the fact that I'm like a little bit unpolished, right? Like I said to somebody yesterday, like sometimes I think my unpolished is my polish. Like that's kind of what makes me me. That my unpolished
Yep.
maybe people kind of looked at and were trying to figure out like, okay, what is her skill set, right? Like they're trying to determine, and then once they get to work with me, they're, oh, okay. But like there's definitely a perception I think sometimes people have if somebody's really nice that like maybe they're trying to compensate for the fact that they are not as successful as they could be, which is just not the case. And to you, which I love that you
Right.
said, especially in our world right now, kindness is everything. Kindness is what's going to help
Mhm.
us to maneuver through these challenges and struggles. I'm working with a journalist right now on an article, and it's talking about the kindness as a credential.
Yep.
People are more likely to trust you if they know that you're going to be kind. You're going to feel better. People are going to feel better if they're kind. And so, for you to say to me like I felt that you were authentically kind, like that actually, no matter how many times I hear that, always makes me get like a tingling sensation because it's so important to me that people feel that people don't feel like I'm keeping score or that later on down the road I'm going to come back and say like, oh, remember when I was kind to you, right? Like
Yeah.
I just want people to feel in the moment loved, right?
Yep.
That to me is everything about my life. Forget what my professional goals are, what do I hope to achieve by any of the particular things that I'm doing. Like I want people to feel loved.
Yep. And
So, yeah.
I just can't I can't tell you how much that means like that's how I knew how much you aligned with what this podcast is all about, because it's so genuine. Your story of resilience is so real. And then for you to go from having a story of tremendous resilience in mind to then, becoming a growth and change, consultant and helping people work through their own, resilience, basically, to be successful in those ways because you've walked it yourself, but to do it from a kind, true, genuine, loving, like, place, that is something that it's otherworldly, I would say. It's not something that you see a lot in this world, because a lot of people are very just focused on the bottom end, and it's not that those things don't matter, but it's like you have like almost a whole nother level of reward that's more than just money, that is obvious just in the way that you carry yourself. Like, you care genuinely about impact and helping people see that growth. And like, you talked about articles that you're helping with, journal article that you're helping write, and you've been very successful in that department. You've been in some really big, like, Wall Street Journal and Newsweek and all these like really big, articles and publications that, that's success, and that's like something that many people could just become, another way of saying it, full of themselves. They could think that they're better than others, or any of any of that. And it's definitely a huge accomplishment, but like, you still carry yourself as the most authentic, genuine, humble individual. And it's like, I want to hear your tools. I want to learn like your ways, because like, I want you to kind of take us to, because what you do is really helping people be resilient. I mean, could there be any more of an aligned person on this podcast? Like, that's literally your like job. So if you were going to share a little bit about that, like, as much as you want to, from like your personal story of resilience to like helping other people be resilient, like, and just how you've had such success because you're real and you're sharing that real. The tagline on this podcast is sharing your real on your way to resilience. And like, I'm so excited to hear it. I'm so excited.
So, wow. I mean, you're something. I got to tell you that it's hard. It's not hard. It's hard in the sense that, I want to like my go-to is I want to give you a hug and say thank you. And it's like there's the computer screen and I'm like,
Yeah,
so,
a little far away
I
for that.
really, I appreciate that fills in, I posted something today about that. When you operate a little bit outside the norm, which I think that's changing, the tide's changing a little bit now. We're starting to really recognize kindness as important and stuff, but sometimes the way that you're perceived isn't always in a favorable light. And there have been people that have really helped me to feel confident and comfortable in just being authentically me. And that allows me to sustain myself because there are really hard days. And I want people to know that there are
Yeah.
really hard days because I want people to know that like I'm not in a different place. Than anybody else. So like you're saying those words, like you're part of that, like you're part of the movement. Like you will now be part of everything I do from this point forward in my life because you've just spoken that into me. And so I really value that. And I think like when we're talking about resilience, like, because I want to mention something else you said, but we're talking about resilience. We're talking about your podcast. You're talking about, what are the things that I recommend? Like what you just did, right? If we want to look at ways that we can foster resilience in our culture and in the lives of other people, that is it, right? That is helping people feel confident, comfortable, recognized, and seen as who they are, and calling out very much in the same way that like we talk about positive reinforcement in work environments and positive reinforcement with our children, right? We all operate under liking and in a good way, liking to hear that the things that we're trying to do for a certain purpose are successful or are productive, whatever, motivating. Um, so, you're
Yeah.
part of that, and that's amazing. Like, I don't know that you would necessarily recognize the fact that like that's so powerful to go, hey, Deb, I see this and it really means a lot. And I think you're doing great things. right? Like that catapults me forward. Um,
Wow,
the other thing
that's
you said
awesome.
that really, yeah, no, thank you. I want you to know that I deeply appreciate those words. And you said something that I'm glad that you said because it's one of the biggest fears I had. So there's a couple fears you have when you start to step out and become more visible, particularly in social media. That's the medium that most of us really use right now to try to
Yeah,
build our business, build our message because it's there and that's where people are, right? So like
yeah,
is as important as I love written media, but like a lot of people are online, so you're going to use that format. And there's two main fears that most people usually have. One is that like people aren't going to think you're any good, or you're going to look down on you. They're not going to like the content that you're producing. And the other fear is they're going to think that you
mhm,
think you're better than them. Because when you start sharing pictures of yourself and you start sharing posts and you're telling people all these motivational things, it does come across very much as if like I know better than you and so therefore I'm going to tell you what you should do.
yeah,
And the reality is this.
yeah,
We are all, every single one of us, everyone on this earth, incredible, incredible, amazing miracles. From the moment we enter this earth, we matter. We're filled with gifts. Filled with a unique light, and that never changes from the moment of our birth till our last breath. We are incredible human beings. And as part of
mhm,
that, we also all are given unique gifts.
yep,
And those unique gifts work well with the gifts of
mhm,
other people, right? So you think about like people on a baseball team as an example, right? You have your people that have your different positions. Any one of them could play their own position and they could play it very well. But if you don't have the rest of the team, it's not going to be successful. And that's what we are like globally. All of us have this part to play in
yeah,
this world. And as such, in order for us to help one another, we have to know the other people that have the other gifts that we're going to need to be able to work. And you can't know about those unless you tell people about them. And I
yeah,
had to get
true,
over that fear of like, okay, well, if I step up and say, hey, I'm really good at this, that it doesn't mean I'm saying I'm really good and you're not. Or even,
yeah,
it doesn't even mean that I'm better at this than you. There are other people that do this and are very good at it as well. And maybe we can collaborate. But like, I had to get past that was really the harder because I almost was like, okay, well, if people think that what I'm saying doesn't make sense or it's not good, like, that's a little bit of like you feel the ouch of that. But the bigger piece for me was like, I don't want anybody to feel like they shouldn't shine their light because I'm like, hey, I got this. Like I got this covered. So like,
yeah,
um, and so it's still hard. Like that's a daily struggle. When I post about like winning an award because like I want people to be part of the journey. I want people to see it and know that that's
yeah,
something that they can do. I want people to participate in that enthusiasm with me. I want them to be on that journey with me because that's part of like knowing all of me. But
yeah,
that I worry that people see that and think that there's going to be people that are going to feel less than. Um, so, that ties in a lot with the resilience piece because I think, and that's why it's so important for people like you in this podcast, right? To feed into people and to call people out and go, hey, I want to have you on this podcast. I want you to talk about the things that you're good at. And then say positive messages. So it's like, okay, I'm not wandering off course. I'm not living outside of what I intended to be. Because you're right, you can get caught up in the momentum of things going in a positive direction. And you never want to lose sight of the gratitude for all of the people, places, and things that have gotten you, to where you are, to God for giving me the gifts that I have and leading me to meet the right people at the right times.
yep.
So
Gratitude is a huge, like, that's been almost like a
exactly.
life-changing thing for me, even more so this last year. But like, it's huge part is to still remember and still have that gratitude, but it's like you're so sharing your journey is so empowering to other people because it's showing them, like you just said, like you sharing those gifts that God's given you and like um those skill sets that you have is showing other people that it's possible, so in turn it's actually empowering other people.
Yeah, and we light each other's candles and we help each other and we grow together. And I I'm sure there are some negative people out there, and you're gonna, of course, on social media, and I feel for the people that are in that. There are going to be people that are going to reach out with negative comments simply because that's what drives them. They're for whatever reason that they're hurting in their
Yeah.
lives, that's something that they use as an outlet. So like there's going to be some of that that happens. But, for all the positive feedback that you get from people and you're like, okay, and I do like, and I've told you and to your audience would even say like the first conversation we had, I was like, this is the type of person that I can say like, hey, if you ever see me posting or doing something that you feel like, Deb, this doesn't feel like it's in alignment with you, I want you to feel comfortable to reach out to me and say that. Like, because I felt like from what you were saying that you understood what my goals and where my heart was. And so like
Mhm.
you want to surround yourself with people like that that are going to that you can count on to say, yeah, I don't think that's necessarily what you want to say. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be right, but that you want people who are going
Yeah.
to feel comfortable coming to you. And I think that's a big piece of resilience, is surrounding yourself with people that aren't just going to tell you what you want to hear, but that are going to keep you in the place that you want to be in your heart. Right. I don't mean,
I'm so glad you
and it's,
said that. Yeah.
yeah, you've got to receive that feedback and you've got to be open to that, because um that's the way we love into our purpose, is making sure that we're keeping in mind that we are human beings and we're going to make mistakes and we're going to get tired and we're going to have those difficult days. So you do want the people that are going to help pull you up when you're falling down. And you also want the people, they can be the same people that are going to help remind you of what really matters and make sure that you're not losing sight of that in the midst of the chaos of everyday activity. Um,
Yeah. I mean, it's that's so important. That's super big too, because I'm glad you said that, because I think again, a kind of a countercultural message of actually ask people that you trust, that you align with, to have a voice when you want to hear feedback, even if it's not like, even if there's something that you're doing that you want the hard feedback. In fact, I welcome that with my mentor. That's like the biggest thing that I want in my life is, I don't trust you if you're always telling me that everything's good, because I'm human and I know everything's not always good. So it's like, that's such a, I think that that's one of the key aspects of resilience. So I think it's really amazing that you brought that up, because like I've noticed that in my own life, like how important that is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as much as, because I talk about being nice. So when I want to be clear, like it's more kindness than nice. And I'll tell you the reason why I want to clarify that. Because like there's a phrase that we use a lot, right? Like if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Right. And the reality of the matter is some things that we have to say are not nice. There are unnice things
Yep.
and messages that have to be delivered. So when I was a teacher, people would say that, and I kind of flipped it. I was like, I don't really like that expression, because I realize sometimes I'm gonna have to say things like, if I tell a student like, this is not your best work, you need to give me your best work. That's not a nice statement. So I changed it to, if it doesn't educate, elevate, or motivate, save it. So there are things
I like that.
that are unnice, right? But like if it educates, elevates, or motivates, and I include in the elevation category entertainment, right? So if it's making you laugh, as long as it's not, you know, not motivating, not right. So it's got to fall into that area. And I think to your point, because of that, because we do have to be able and willing to hear things that we don't want to hear, and able and willing to share those things as well with one another in a mindful and respectful way. And
Mhm.
sometimes those accountability people, they may say to you, hey, I noticed that you've changed your direction. Is this really what you want? And sometimes you go, yeah, you're right, I did. And yes, I do. Right. It doesn't necessarily mean that every time somebody tells you something, it means you're wrong and you have to completely correct
Yeah.
course. It's just, it's like it's an interplay, it's an exchange.
Yeah.
Um, and in alignment with that, because like I do a workshop on the power of the phrase, I don't know. I don't know what, saying it as a leader, saying it as a student, right? But acknowledging when you don't know something. And I tell the
Mhm.
story of, it's funny, it's slash not funny, but I had my parents would come over to my house a lot. My mom has since passed away, but at the time my parents were both would be coming over to my house, and I smelled gas in the house. And at this point, I was a single parent, and I would refer to my dad. That was the thing I would do. I'd be like, I'd ask his perspective, and so I was like, I smell gas. Something doesn't smell right. And my dad's like, no, 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 it's fine. And I'm like, I don't think it's fine. Like I'm like, I'm like, I think something's wrong. Like I'm smelling something and it's making, and he was like, it's totally fine. He's like, I'm sure of it. Everything is fine. Okay. So a couple days goes by and I'm like, this isn't right. So I call the gas company comes and they're like, if somebody had lit a candle, you'd have had like a serious issue. So there was like that degree because apparently with
Oh,
propane,
my
I forget how it like pools. I forget the science behind it, but it like pools. So when it explodes, it's like devastating. So now at the end of the day, like my dad's allowed to make mistakes, but when I called him and I was like, and he knows I share this story, and I was like, Dad, I was like, oh, just the gas person was here, and they said that there was this bad leak and stuff. I said, so I'm just letting you know. And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, I knew that was a possibility. And I was like, what? He's like, well, I really, he's like, I didn't know. I just didn't want you to worry. So I'm like, well, so you didn't know. So it's not even like he made a mistake. Like he very confidently said he was positive nothing was wrong. But now he's telling me, well, I really didn't know. And I said, why didn't you just tell me you didn't know? Well, I didn't want you to worry. And I'm like, well, like, let's think about the situation. Like, explosion, worry, right? Like you've got to weigh these things. But I think like when I really dissect it and come back to it, I think, and I've told him this, I think it was less about him not wanting me to worry and more that he was like, had put himself in this position of I'm the solver. And so I have to have the answer. And it
yeah,
was much easier to just give me the answer than to say, I don't know. And he's had, we've kind of worked through that. That's a challenge that he has. So that's a lot of what sometimes we do in these situations is because we see ourselves as like, okay, I'm the leader and this person's asking me a question and I'm not 100% certain of the answer, but I know they expect me to have the answer. Now, I always pause to say this is not the same as being in a crisis situation, right? If there is
mhm,
a crisis situation and a decision needs to be made right now, you're going to have to make some decisions when you're not fully confident. That's going to happen.
yeah,
But if you've got a
yeah,
moment to pause, we really need to nurture the brilliance of saying, I don't know. I don't know that. I'm going to have
yeah,
to get back to you. I need to look up that information, or I'm going to redirect you to somebody who does know that information more.
yeah,
That
yeah,
willingness to be vulnerable. Because when we do that and we acknowledge what we don't know, we allow ourselves to find out additional information, to make sure that we're connecting with people who are going to know the pieces that we don't know. And
uh-huh,
to your point, that feeds into the resilience, right? So like, making sure that we say those statements and it also connects with the accountability, right? If we acknowledge that like we're not always going to be the best judge of ourselves in difficult circumstances and when we're under pressure, et cetera. Um, but I think that like it's really important for us to feel okay being vulnerable and acknowledging that we don't have all the answers and that doesn't mean that I'm not like I can be a growth and change expert and it doesn't mean that I'm going to know everything you come to me about with growth and change,
yep.
right?
And
Like people go ahead.
no, that's like the biggest thing I think I learned in education. As I was the first person in my family to earn a bachelor's degree, and it was a big deal to me just because I wanted to go to school. Education and growth and learning was like I loved it. I'm like a nerd that way.
Me
And it
too.
wasn't about the status, it was just a matter that like I got to go to school and like get a degree in something that I wanted to and learn. And the biggest thing I came away from college with was not that I became an expert. It was the fact that I learned how to know what I don't know and how to continue to learn. And I've noticed that with so many people with education and resilience. And it's interesting because you have a teaching background, you know, that is such a huge, like, significant tool. Curiosity, being able to admit that you don't know and, kind of knowing where to look for the answers and being able to like be humble in that way. Those are the people that I trust more than the people who just shoot out
Right.
information to look like they know it all. Like, in fact, I think posted that not that long ago. I said, don't trust people that look like they have it all together. Trust people that know when to say they've messed up, or to own when they have done something wrong, or don't have the answer. And so, like, you would think
Right.
that I would have rehearsed all of this with you, because everything that you're saying is just like so in alignment with resilience and all of what I've already learned. It's exciting to hear because you're literally like your whole job is basically helping people be resilient and like growth and change. And I I'm in awe, honestly. You left me speechless probably for the first time on my podcast.
Well, and I love that you said learning because I throw that like I've been, I change my one liner sometimes depending on the setting, but and so like a lot of times learning will come in there too because I just think like the desire to learn, like you learn from every conversation, you learn from every day. We're constantly growing and learning, and it's amazing if you like at the end of the day, like what is one thing I learned today, right? And every day, if you
Yeah.
were like, oh, what's one thing I learned today, and you could think of something that you learned. Um, yeah, and then yeah, I'm speechless now because 'cause I'm just thinking about, like, it is really cool that, like, what the things that you're saying and how much they're matching up with,
I wanna hear a little bit
yeah.
more about your, because you know, you show that you have a background. Did you go to Harvard or did you teach? What is your connection with Harvard? Because you talk about your education, some education from Harvard, like how, I mean, that's a very prestigious school. So I'm curious how that is part of your story as well, because
So
obviously you're
interesting.
very intelligent. It's very obvious.
So this is funny. It's funny you asked that question. I have never talked about the Harvard piece, and my actual Harvard education is very minor. It's through Harvard Business School online, which is it's like associated with Harvard, but not. But it's funny that
Mhm.
you asked that question. I don't know that I've ever really talked about this even publicly. So when I was in high school, I the oh gosh, it's a long story. I'm going to try to condense it, but I was an athlete. I was a student. I was academic. I was very hardworking. And the budget got cut one year, and they do. I don't know if this is it. This might be different depending on geographic locations, but in the area that we live, the budget defines like what kind of activities the school are going to have, and the budget is paid for by the local town. So like we have school taxes and they get paid. And so when the community votes down the budget, there's reduced money for extracurricular activities that would include things like your music programs, your sport programs, anything that's not your classes, your daytime classes, right? And even some of that stuff, like it might be like they can't get new textbooks. So the budget got passed down, and we have this thing where you can like if the budget doesn't go through the first time, it can go back up for a vote. And I was in my junior year of high school, and the budget got voted down. It was the end of the year, and I was upset from a personal perspective because it was going to impact activities that I was involved in. And you're like thinking like, how does this connect with Harvard? I promise it does.
No, I'm
Um,
excited. I'm glad that you're sharing the real story.
so people were so I started doing this research about like, extracurricular activities and what is the impact on the community, right? And there were some folks in the community that had been part of the movement of voting the budget down that like now like if they met me now they'd be like oh, but at the time they were like okay, some high school student is like not going to care about this, like why would some high school student be like so interested in like doing this research and stuff, right? And so when I started kind of going to the board meetings and talking about these different pieces of information, some of the members of the community were like felt that they would say it was being indoctrinated. They felt that like members of the school district were like sitting me down and like rehearsing with me things to say and stuff like that because they didn't think like why was some high school student like going to care about this stuff. But like
Yeah,
I literally was just like you used the term nerd before, and like what I just was passionate about stuff, and I was like okay.
yeah.
And I like to write, like I wrote an article for the newspaper, and I started this whole this group called Students for Education. And
Oh, wow.
so I like this whole thing going. And so one of the administrators at the time when I was doing all this stuff was she's like, are you interested in getting into like political science? I could see you like going into the political science field. You're like very passionate, you're very well spoken, you're got good writing skills and stuff. And yeah, I kind of toyed around with it for a moment, but I was like, and I'm sure there are politicians that are wonderful, but at the time I was like, I feel like if you go into that world, it's very hard to be like, I don't like to be, I'm on this side or I'm on this side. I like to like
Yeah,
hear everybody out. And I like to, so I think I felt like that's
yeah,
going to really segment me. And she talked about like, oh, but you could go into law. And I'm like, no, again, I just like, that's not where my heart is. I do love the advocacy component. I like being a
yeah,
voice when people don't want to
same.
hear it, but, like,
Yep.
I was like, that's not the thing that I wanna do." She was completely respectful for that, but she's like, at the time, the school that I went to, I'm pretty sure had never had a student go to Harvard. And, she had been in communication with somebody and was like, "You could be you could be our Harvard student." Now, I wasn't the top of the class, I had very good grades, and that's, partially by the grace of God, right? Like, not everybody is gifted with, even though I worked really hard, learning wasn't as hard to me as it is to some other people, and I wanna
Yeah,
recognize
for
that
sure.
because, like,
I'm glad
there
to
were
hear.
people that probably worked twice as hard as me and didn't get as good at grades, and
Yeah.
I definitely worked hard and did what I needed to do, but I also was able to learn quickly, and that's not
Yeah.
anything that I created. That's just how I was, part of my gifts. So, she was kind of promoting that, and like I was at like a there was a lot of things going on in my life at that particular time. The alcoholism that I mentioned to you when we had spoken on another occasion, there was alcoholism in the house, there was things. So like this weird dynamic starts to happen where like you want to get away from your house because of all the dysfunction, but you're also like, I can't get too far away from my house because of all the dysfunction. And like,
Yeah.
even at the age I'm at now, like I think there's still days where I try to unpack the levels of like why I made the different decisions that I made. And ultimately, I had two concerns. I was like, that's quite a ways away from where I lived. I lived in New York and Harvard's in Massachusetts. That would be a long ways away. I'm not even sure that I would really want to go down that path. And I just wasn't sure that I wanted to kind of dive into that whole like commit to this is what I'm going to do. And at the same time, I was like, well, that's kind of cool. I'd be like, assuming that everything like, the application didn't go through. She was talking to somebody,
Yeah.
they were interested in me, but I want to make very clear to the world,
Yeah.
I'm not declaring that I applied and got in, but that this person was definitely, there was definitely some interest involved there. And but I didn't. And, I don't regret holistically the choices that I made. I mean, I didn't end up going away really to school. I went to some place that was I could live on campus, ended up getting diagnosed with Lyme disease that I may or may not have had, and ended up moving back home and commuting to college. So, whole other podcast that could cover that topic.
Yeah,
But,
for sure.
so if you fast forward, I think as I went through these various different challenging circumstances in my life, right? I had two very challenging marriages prior to my current marriage, and some different things that happened in my life that I've struggled with anxiety and depression. That at some point I kind of looked back and I was like, should I have like pursued that? Like, should I have pursued going to Harvard? Like, what would that have meant? But so much of what I talk to people about is that, like, ultimately, at the end of the day, whatever choices you could or couldn't have made in your past, you really don't know, right? Like, we tend to make the road we didn't travel like this beautiful, like, if I had done this, all these amazing things would have happened. Like, you really don't know that. But there's still going to be those pieces of regret. And I don't think we should ignore those. Like, it's okay to go, like, oh, that might have been cool if I did that. So it was this thing
Yeah.
that was on my heart. So in October of 20 so I'm trying to the years now, October of 2022, um, as in 2022 was really when I started to realize like, I'm doing all of this work, I'm writing, I'm gonna take a step out, I'm gonna be more visible about all of this stuff on social media. And so I started like, what are the things I need to do to really commit myself to making these different changes. And so I started taking some Harvard Business School. I started a program for Harvard Business School online, with kind of a wink to the high school me that like,
Yeah.
guess what, Deb? And it's different. Harvard
Yep.
Business School online is different than and did these incredible program that they had. And they talked with leaders of Levi's and McAfee, um, Bank Lume. There was a few different leaders that they kind of use as part of this program. Actually, Chip Berg, who's the CEO of Levi's, and I have actually communicated with him on LinkedIn as a result of that because I reached out to him. I just loved some of what he modeled as a leader and did those programs. And and it was tough because I was like trying to juggle doing the work and making sure I really poured myself into that because no part of me wants to ever partially do something. And so that's
Yeah.
where I got the certificate in organizational leadership was through Harvard Business School online, but it's the story's incomplete if you don't connect it with that there's that little piece of you that's like, oh, would things have gone quicker? Would I have gone in a different direction? Would I have had a path that would have led me quicker to where I am now? But it wouldn't be me. I would be a
Nope.
different me. And so um I proudly kind of wink to Harvard in that regard, that like, you know, it's there, it's part of me, and ultimately, honestly, I believe that you can get the most amazing education from a community college.
It's true.
You don't need to go to an Ivy League school to get that
Yeah.
if you put the work in.
I really, really, really love that you shared all of that because I feel like that's really the real of your story of the fact that, you went this route and I don't like you said, would you have had the experiences that you've had you gone a different
Mm,
route? Would you have written the articles that you have if you had gone that route? I mean, that's
right.
an interesting thing to think about.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think back to moments, some of the horrible moments of my life. Like there was a time when I was going through a very, very bad depression and had some just very, I mean, it was a longer story, but there had been a death of a friend, and I was in a unhealthy relationship situation. There's all of these things happening. I remember laying on the bathroom floor thinking like, this cannot be my life. Like I was depleted. Had been like kind of dry heaving from the emotion of everything. And I remember thinking like, this can't be it. Right. And in that moment, even though, like, I was so depressed, I knew, like, there's gotta be something better. There's gotta be something out of this, right? But, like, certainly, I would never think this is contributing to something wonderful. I know
Mhm.
now that, like, part of what makes me good at what I do is that moment on the bathroom floor, right? Like,
Yep.
you've gotta understand the fact that, like, and, like, this is the reason that, like, I don't get mad when somebody cuts me off in traffic. Like, that person might just be coming from their bathroom floor moment.
Yep.
And so then when we keep it in perspective, that like that whole broad thing, that like the person that we think is completely arrogant, we don't know. The person that we think is completely lazy, we don't know. Um
Nope.
and so when we approach all of our interactions in that way, knowing that whatever biases we might have, because we're going to have them, and that's okay. It's okay to have them as long as we keep them in check and recognize that they're there for whatever reason. We enter into all of the interactions curious to uncover the reality as opposed to what our perception is, aware that our perception is there to keep us safe, right? Like if something
Mhm.
feels really icky in your stomach, you want to be careful. There's an
Yeah.
intuition. But if we're curious to find out the reality, that we just build so many amazing connections, even with people that like I don't necessarily enjoy the moment that I'm interacting with them because they might be being unpleasant to me, but, like, in my inner strength, right, I'm going, like, "I am learning from this right now." Like, I'm learning from the things that are being said, I'm learning from how I'm gonna respond to this, and I'm gonna walk away from this in a different place. And
Yeah.
so, those bathroom floor moments are really, really important for us to consider as, what I call the life resume. Right, the
Yep.
life resume, those things that earned us degrees and awards that nobody will ever know about, will not have a certificate, they're not gonna be framed, but
Yep.
man, do they make us incredible, right, really
Yep.
incredible.
That's
So
it's interesting because at some point we'll talk about this later, but that's actually what my book that God put in my heart to write about is the struggle, and how important that suffering is in part of our journey. And I truly believe it is something that creates us into who we're supposed to be. And I think that those of us who walked through suffering really have become more of the characteristics and those traits. That's when those things get shaped into us. And oftentimes not when we're on that, platform because we achieved some great status. It's on bathroom floor moments and times when that's how you become somebody that is more kind to others, that looks at yourself and looks at yourself with humility and understands that there's different things going on with different people, and that all the things that you talk about with kindness and resilience, like it really, I love that you call it bathroom floor moments because I think that that's really where resilience is built, is in those moments. It's in those
Right.
hard times, and it's that's how you become somebody who has more to share with others and has, you know, more to gain from others, really, because that's what I get from you every single time I talk to you, is that you are somebody that looks at everyone else as you're a learner of others, and that makes you an incredible advocate for others because you listen well and you care a lot. And it's just very authentic every time I've only gotten to talk to you a few times, and it's been super super obvious. And you know, I you have something exciting coming out. You shared a little bit about it on social media. Do you want to talk a little bit about that before we wrap things up? Because I want people to know about it because I'm excited. I mean, I want to be on like the pre-order list. So I would love
Well,
for you to
yeah, we
share a little bit
can.
about that because I think it does have to do with your story.
Well, I'm going to declare right here that yeah, we are going to talk about that book because that's coming out in March, and so that's going to be two books that are talked about on this call that are going to be published. One that I'm going to talk about, and the one that you just talked about. That's going to be written. So,
Scary.
you dropped it, and I was like, well, now it's fair game. She mentioned it, so I can just go there. You're going to do it. You're going to talk about the struggle, and I have a question that I'm going to ask you at the end, but. Yeah, so I've been writing for majority of my life. Pretty much as soon as I could start writing, I started writing in diaries, and a lot of those diary entries turned into kind of poems, if you will. And it was always there. And it's interesting that I like the way that I see things like poetry. Like when I'm looking at something, even without the words being in my head, like I see things differently. It's like there's just kind of this poet that's always been inside of me. And I wanted to be I say I wanted to be a writer, right? I was a writer. I am a writer, but you say like, "Oh, I wanted to be a writer," meaning like professional, like that's what I was going to do. And
Yeah.
for various reasons, I think I just felt that that wasn't necessarily going to be a path that I could 100% count on. And I was like, I'm going to take a path where there's something where I'm going to be able to, but I should have continued on with doing stuff with it. So I continued to write. I mean, I never stopped writing. And I mean, sometimes it comes, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and it just comes out of me. Like, it's not like I
Yeah.
sit and strategize. It just comes, and it's amazing because I'll read back what I wrote and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And it's neat to know that it's just coming through me. Like I'm the kind of the vessel. So I have
Yep.
published in the past some stuff,
Yep.
but this book is it'll be my first
Yeah.
solo publication, and it's a poetry book. It's going to be called On This Path. I will talk about in the introduction to the book where that title comes from and why that title is important to me. And it is going to include some poems from across my life. It's not going to be all of my poems because I'm going to be doing some different projects and stuff, but it's going to be a lot of my favorite poems, and they're going to come from different areas of my life, including a poem that I wrote in 5th grade. And just going to add that in there because I think it's kind of cute to see a poem from 5th grade, Deb, especially
Yeah.
since it's particularly interesting what I was writing about at the time. The poem is called Guilty Conscience, which I don't think any 10-year-old should be thinking about. But at 10 years old, I was declaring
Wow.
myself the guilty one. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
That's a interesting, right? So the poetry book's going to be coming out in March because my birthday is
Woohoo!
March 23rd, and I had been looking
Perfect
at different
timing.
times. Yeah, I was gonna do it. It was gonna come out last year, and some things happened, and I realized like I really didn't want to release it at the end of the year with the holidays because that wasn't really flow of it. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna wait. So it's gonna come out in March. I'm gonna be having a book launch group with that on Facebook and doing some different things. And then I'm gonna be doing some traveling for some book signings I actually put up today, kind of letting people tell
Okay.
me where they'd like to go. But um then
Interesting.
shortly after that, there'll be a supplemental book that will be reflections on the poem. So it'll be like the poem, what it meant for me, what was the story behind the poem, and what that poem meant. So the poetry book is going to
Wow.
stand by itself because most people like to just have a book of poetry. They don't want it to have like excerpts and essays and things in it.
Yeah.
So like he'll be the book of poetry, and then the book that will follow it will be the why I wrote that, if you will, and it'll be the story behind it so that like people that want to know, because sometimes people want to interpret it themselves, but people that want to know what it actually meant to me, can read the story behind the poem, which is going to be really interesting to kind of dig into.
I can't wait to read both because I love poetry. You know, my sister and my dad will oftentimes write poems, and we kind of just write them for each other sometimes. But like, that can be such a cathartic way to share your journey, and like exciting way for people to read, because poetry has rhythm to it and it has metaphor and all of that. And so I'm just really excited to read this, and I'm
Thank you.
excited for the book that shares about it too, because I think that will be really enlightening and probably encouraging to other people to like know the behind the scenes of the poems. And congratulations, like that's a huge
Thank you.
accomplishment for you. I mean, you're a writer. Obviously, you have publications in incredible news, outlets and things, and that's just huge. But like to have a book, like that's a whole nother level of commitment. And I'm just really excited. I can't wait to share it as much as I possibly can when it comes out, because like I'm sure I'm gonna just jump on it and be able to read it. And oh,
You'll get a
congratulations
signed
and happy
copy
early
and
birthday too, because that's
yeah.
amazing. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
You'll get a
That's
sign, yeah,
amazing.
well, and
Wow.
I, as I
Well,
mentioned to you, I get emotional because it's like the poems in me and the wanting to get this into a book. It's been like inside of me going like, let me out, to the point that it was like, okay, you're doing this. So it's emotional to be to know it's
yep,
happening and know that nothing will stop it. Like it's happening
yep,
now, and it's going to be there. And um I'm not like, people are like, "Oh, what goals do you have for the success of the book?" I'm like, the people will read it and be moved, right? If one person
yep,
buys it and hands it to 50 people instead of 50 people buying their own books, they get the message, great. Right? Like it's about the
right.
message, and it's about hoping that people feel something about themselves that helps them in a way that is meaningful, which I think poetry has just an incredible ability to do.
That's a true, like, I think that the advocate really is somebody who truly just wants to reach people, because I had that same feeling with my retreat. When I did my first retreat, I said, even if one person shows up and this reaches one person, I will do the whole thing again, because that's the whole goal. And like you just said that about the book, and like it just reaches to the alignment in your heart of like your goal is really for other people to know they're not alone, which is the whole goal of this podcast. And to know that like there's a way for them to connect through their own journey and what they're going through. And um writing is kind of, sometimes hideaway or wherever you are, reading something and just connecting in that way, like it's a powerful way to connect with people. And I have no doubt that this is going to go big, because it's not because of anything more than you are an extremely authentic person, and you're coming at this with a real um vulnerable side, as well as kindness, and like the truth behind the purpose of what you're doing is what is going to carry it into the next
Thank
level. And
you.
I'm so excited. I feel extremely privileged to have you share this on the podcast. It's huge.
Thank
I
you.
can't wait.
Thank you. Well, so you're gonna when you're gonna write your first page. Give me the date. You're gonna write your first page. We're gonna call it right
The
now.
date that I'm
The
gonna
date. The
um
first page. Just one page. That's all I want. I want one page.
yes, I will do it. I'll commit to doing that this weekend. Why not?
Yeah, there we go.
Start
That's what I love.
soon.
That's it. I wanna remember this moment. Mark it on the calendar that happened. This is fantastic. I don't know if people know, so now it's 10:10
Yep.
in my time zone, and I'm here just the tears are coming. See, I held on for so long, but um I feel really moved by this conversation, by your genuine nature. I think you're outstanding conversationalist in a very specific way, not just in the podcast productivity way, but in the way that you brought out stories. I hadn't shared some of those. By the way, you asked the question, the things that you asked, the pieces that you caught. I think that that's a gift, and I think that you're going to continue to, as you spoke into my life, you're going to continue to see that grow. and blossom. And you're absolutely right. Whether it's one person that listens, and you don't know what that one person's going to do, right? Like there's lots of stories in the world, right? Like Mother Teresa was one person. So
Yep.
whoever impacted Mother Teresa, right? So
Yep.
like yeah, just keep going. I am so grateful for that Instagram message that I got from you that started off this beautiful relationship. This is just the first of many podcasts we will do together.
Yes.
It's a beautiful future. I'm absolutely certain of that.
I can't thank you enough for being willing to be on this. I mean, that was a shot in the dark because I was so like I was just overwhelmed by who you are and what you do, and I was sharing your content, and that's how we connected. And I it's a dream to have you on here. So this is amazing. You are somebody that pours in, and you nothing returns void when you have an interaction with Deb. So I just want everybody to get the opportunity to hear her story, to interact with her in a way on here. And I do want you, even though you're not somebody all about self promotion, that you've never acted that way at all, I want the opportunity for anybody who does want your resources, because this is Resilience Resourcing Podcast. The whole goal is for people to have access to resources, and you have and are an incredible resource. And so if people want to reach out to you, if they want to buy your book, if they want to hear about your consulting services, if they just want to have a friend who cares about them, whatever it is, how can they reach out to you? What is the best way for them to contact you?
Sure. So on Instagram, it's at D Harrison PVD. On Facebook, it's at D Harrison PVD. And I should, so in case those get blurred together, P is in purpose, V is in vision, D is in drive. So D Harrison PVD. And the Facebook is, oh, I said Facebook. YouTube is at D Harrison PVD. My website is dharrisonpvd.com. I'm on some other social media too, but I think those are the easiest for people. A lot. I've picking up the amount of content that I've been putting on YouTube lately. So that seems to be really taking off, which is neat because I think I'm going to start streaming on there. So that's a great one. But any platform that people want to message me, I love that you added Just Want a Friend. You can definitely reach out to me if you have no interest in the book or any of my consulting services and you just want to say, hey, say, hey, I love connections and feeding love into people. So I thank you for this opportunity. I think this was really a beautiful evening.
Thank you. I can't thank you enough.